Welcome back to Be Good Leadership, everyone. This is where we talk about leading, teaching, and learning to create great school communities. So let's talk about retrieval practice. If there's one thing I think it's irresponsible for schools to not be practicing and for schools to not be teaching students to use, and if you really want to learn something to a high degree, we should be practicing it in our own personal development, is retrieval practice. It's irresponsible not to be using this practice because has the most robust support in terms of cognitive science of almost any other pressure tested idea for how we learn best and a tool to use for learning. It's also been called the testing effect, which I think people called it a testing effect at one point in time. And because in education, people are like, oh, testing, we already do too much testing and this, that, and the other. People have, maybe it made them shy away from it. So I'm going to call it retrieval practice because it's so important for learning. It's not about evaluation. It's about using this tool to enhance your learning. And maybe one of the biggest mistakes we ever made was deciding, and I don't know at what point in time this became the standard operating procedure, was to sort of decry any kind of memory, that memorization, and I think they meant rote memorization, but that memory, oh no, we're not about memorizing. Who needs to memorize anything, right? Because now we can look everything up. But if you have to look everything up, you haven't mastered things. If you have to look everything up and you don't have information that's stored in your brain, if you don't have information that you can recall, that you can just bring forth, then you are missing out on your brain's ability to not just synthesize information, but also to create new information and to critically think in the domain that you know a lot about. Remember, people who know a lot in a particular domain are going to be better critical thinkers in that domain. That study has already been done. That's already been tested. Now, we got crazy about 21st century skills, and we thought that we could teach critical thinking outside of, domain dependence, which we cannot. For instance, I'll just give you a quick example and you'll just know it to be true. You could teach me all the critical thinking skills in the world. But if I don't know physics, I can't critically think in physics. If I haven't actually studied biology, I can't critically think in biology. Now, I love to read psychology. I love to read history, philosophy, cognitive science. So therefore, I can use that skill because I know that. And the funny thing is, the person who actually has a basis of history or has a basis of domain-specific knowledge in a field will actually do pretty well critically thinking without you teaching them intentionally critical thinking skills. So when we talk about retrieval practice, what retrieval practice is a forced recall of information that's been covered without the assistance of notes or devices. This means straight from their own mind, they have to recall what it is that I learned, okay? And we know just through history, lived experience, and of course, a ton of research that's consistent over the last 100 years, that using this process increases not just working memory, long-term memory, the ability to synthesize information, and critical thinking. But it's most powerful when used frequently. And so when teachers use it, they use it often, but sometimes they use it haphazardly, right? That when I explain what retrieval practice is, oftentimes they just use it because it's just a part of what we do, but they're not able to focus in on the true power and purpose, which is to actually enhance the learning and not evaluate learning. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about a few strategies for a school community. So one is they found some of the most robust research when it comes to low stakes testing. And low stakes testing or low stakes quizzes, let me tell you, is that small chunks in which you just basically quiz the people on what it is they've learned. Autodidacts use this quite often. Autodidact is someone who actually is self-taught. And it is just a standard, retrieval practice is a standard practice for people who are self-taught in a field. And it's as easy as this. It's actually ingrained in textbooks. And one of the saddest things is that teachers are not actually taught how to use textbooks effectively, which has led to the demonization of textbooks, and we'll talk about that later. But low stakes quizzes, it's basically reading a chunk of something and then answering a question about it. Reading a few pages in a book and then someone asks you a question about what you just read, or ask you to and maybe there's some questions that have been adapted. And what you'll find is in textbooks and some kind of review manuals, you'll find this is normal. You'll read some information, and then what they'll try to do is force you to recall it. And after you've recalled that information, then you go back and you check, well, what do I know just based off my memory? What am I able to recall? And then what you did right, great. What you did wrong, okay, I need to review that again. But it also makes you much more efficient, because when we use low stakes quizzes, the more we do that, the more it focuses their attention on what's important. When we have clarity of objective and we know what we really want them to hone in on and learn, we can put that into the quiz questions. And when those quiz questions are used after a particular learning period, maybe just one lesson, maybe each lesson at the end of the lesson you have a little quiz, or every other lesson you have a little quiz, or at the end of a weekly quiz that kind of wraps up the week, what it does is it forces the kids, when they know it's coming, it forces them to make sure, okay, am I really paying attention? Am I really focusing on this stuff? They might even study some more because they know the quiz is coming. But however, the quiz that just forces them to recall, and it's low stakes, it's not something that's going to kill their grade, right? And sometimes it can be, what they found is that sometimes you can just not grade the quizzes and they'll still be effective. But it seems that as kids get older, into middle school and into high school, and definitely into college, it needs to matter a bit more. It needs to have a little bit more weight. So making it worth a little bit. And anybody who's taught kids for quite a while, like, well, why do I need to know this? Is this going to be on the test, or is this going to count as for a grade? And then you say, because you need cognitive load, you need them actually to try. So if it's a low stakes quiz, what it also does is that they find out very quickly what they know and what they don't. What they know, they don't need to focus so much in their studies on. They also find out pretty readily, okay, here's something I need to go back for. It becomes information for the kid. And of course, ding, 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 we like it because it also becomes information for the teacher. The teacher uses this as a data point. Here's what I need to reteach. Here's what I need to emphasize on. Or here's something that maybe we missed that we need to go back and look at. Be used either way. So then that leads into the second way we can use it is the self-testing, as I mentioned with autodidacts. If a student has a well-developed and well-written textbook, which there are many out there, they can do this themselves when reading through the text. Oftentimes, teachers don't remind students that the text is actually usually chunked up, and cognitive science research has been done in order to organize that text. And most texts are organized so that after a little bit of reading, a little bit of studying, there's a little bit of a quiz. There's some questions. And by doing those questions and answering those questions, the student is more likely to get better at their reading comprehension. They're also more likely to recall and keep what it is they're learning. You can do this by self-testing as well, as that a kid can read through certain topics and make their own questions. Some kids use flashcards. Flashcards are a version of retrieval practice, right? And I think that's been used. It's an oldie but goodie. And kids can use that on their own when you're learning something, when you're learning a new language. Flashcards have they have a tested history for that. But also writing short answer questions. Sometimes I've worked with a teacher who, before a unit, put out all the questions that could possibly be asked, all the short answer and essay questions that she might possibly ask on the assessment at the end of the unit. By doing that ahead of time, at the beginning of the unit, those kids now had study questions. As they went back and in the unit, they saw, okay, can I answer this question? Just recall it. And they could test themselves over the course of a unit. The kids loved it. They saw its value, and it definitely made huge dividends. But self-testing is important. So much research has been done on rereading versus self-testing. Should you reread something to recall it better, or what's it like to just test yourself on it? Self-testing always outperforms rereading. It also, self-testing and retrieval practice also outperform concept maps. So concept maps are a cool tool, but think about how much time they take. Oftentimes students are like, why am I drawing all this thing? Why am I doing this? And they're always wondering is it worth it? And what the research would say is they're cool. You can use them. Concept maps have their place maybe, but it seems that self-testing or low stakes quizzing is more effective with less time. Why not be more efficient, right? But you can think about that, and that's something worth looking into yourself. And the third one, ask students to summarize. Ask students to summarize, write, or speak about what they have learned, and then provide feedback or allow them to check themselves, right? When we're asking kids to, you can do this as easy as pie. They come in at the beginning of a particular class, and let's say it's a science class. Let's say it's a science class. You're doing terms in chemistry or terms in biology. You simply put out 5 terms. Here are 5 terms that we studied last class. Explain this to me. Please write. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to explain to me why these terms are important. Explain it to me as if I am a student who's learning it for the first time. What you're doing there is you're having the students recall, what did I learn last class? These particular terms. Maybe try to recall as much as I can what their definitions are and why they're important, and I'm explaining that to someone. So what you have is not rote memorization, but you're asking them the question of summarize not just what these things are, but why they're important. And this is more likely to put it into their working and long-term memory. It's a simple exercise. It can be a completion grade. It doesn't even need to be graded. These things, all of these low stakes quizzes that they do, fine. You can actually have the kids grade them themselves, right? You can have them grade themselves, trust them a little bit. It's a low stakes quiz. Most of the kids are not going to cheat, right? Let them test themselves. Or they can be, hey, this is a feedback. This is what's actually going to start the class. We're actually going to start the class with this retrieval practice, and then I'm going to give you some feedback. And I also, as a teacher, I get data on what you guys know and what you don't know, and know what I need to reemphasize before we go on with new information. It's a powerful tool, And of course, you can use this in your own adult learning, and you should. Forcing yourself to recall what was talked about and discussed in the last meeting. Forcing yourself to look into actually cognitive science work, right? I mean, too many of us stop learning once we start teaching or get into education, and we just wait for someone else to tell us something. I mean, read a book, right? Test yourself, become more competent, and continue to gain knowledge about how the brain actually works. Not just the trend that's going to come. And we know that they cycle back around every few years, right? But one of the ways to stay consistent, to stay robust, and to really continue focusing and providing clarity in the school building is the 20% that's going to get you 80% of your results. And if you look into cognitive science, retrieval practice is one of those things that it doesn't matter what time period, doesn't matter what culture, doesn't matter what the curriculum is. This practice is something that needs to be used and can and does enhance the learning of the vast majority of students. And it can be differentiated, but hey, we'll talk about that later. So retrieval practice is not controversial. No, it's just a nice tool, man. It's not just a nice tool to use occasionally. It's one that if schools are serious about the craft of teaching, if teachers are serious about student learning, then it should be one of the most ubiquitous strategies that we see and that we're teaching the students to use. And parents who are watching, teach your kid to use it. Look into it and teach them to use it as a study tool. And you can start early, and it will be beneficial. And it's about getting better. I hope this was helpful. You guys have a wonderful evening. Be good.